Thank you for joining us for this impromptu conversation. We're going to take just a moment and share a few things with you while others are getting online. First, I would like to thank all of you that are coming to us tonight through the State of the Nation broadcast with Danny Torres. I want to thank all of you with the ACN and the prophets and prophecy groups around the world. There are several things that are happening simultaneously, and they're happening so fast that the church world is missing a lot of it. Now, I realize that pastors today have their hands completely full trying to get over the pandemic and the COVID, I'm going to say, disruption to their churches. There are people that are not in church today because they somehow got out of the habit of sitting on a church pew and instead choose their living room. Now, I understand that. I went through a year where I fought COVID for my life. But I realized there's nothing like sitting on a pew, listening to the move of God, feeling the move of God, seeing the music, worshiping together, that makes you understand more than all what it meant when it said in the last days, forsake not the assembling of yourself together. So pastors have their hands full trying to recover from that. It's prophets and people like myself that need to bring inspiration, hope, and also information to the church world. So what I'm going to share with you tonight might be fearful for some, but as I've said so many times, it's not the time for fear, but it's time to be informed. And there is a big difference. So we're going to be a little casual tonight, but I want you to stay with us. You might call those that you love, those that you care about, tell them to take 30 minutes out of their life and join us as we walk through some of the things that have happened in the last 10 days. Now, those of you that have followed our ministry, you will know that I have taught for decades that the battles in the last days would be in America against Americans, and it would be haves and have-nots, and it would start with an economic turn of events. Now, I have taught about the fiat currency. I have taught about the gold standard. I have tried to talk to you about the battle that Satan was waging against the churches. You know, a lot of people didn't realize this, but until President Trump took office, there was a law that had been read into Congress and had been passed. That was called the Johnson Act, that allowed the FBI to come into your church, sit on your pew, and if they found anything they thought that was against the administration or that would be against the American theme, they could come in and shut you down. There have been a lot of people that have tried on various occasions to tear the church apart. They started with taking prayer out of school. They started with trying to keep our kids from saying, "In God we trust," and having prayer at football games, and the list goes on. But the battle has changed now. It's not just the war against God. Now there is a war against America and against patriotism. Now, this week I have been a busy man. I have made several trips to Houston. I have been caught up in meetings, and in it all, I was totally enlightened about things that I have taught about and things that I have used in my teaching to try to use the example set before us to bring people to the realization of what is going on. I had a lunch meeting this weekend, and for almost 2 hours, I sat at the table with one of the world-renowned scholars on economy, analyzing the future, and looking at what was happening to currency and countries around the world. And he confirmed to me, in his own words, what I have been teaching to those that come and follow me for the last decade or more. China has been working desperately to take over the World Bank as the reserve currency of the world. And by doing so, they had to destroy the dollar. Now, you think the dollar is strong, you think the dollar is going forward, you think that everything in America is great right now. Unfortunately, that's not true. I'm not going to frighten you, but I'm going to tell you some things that I have taught that have come to pass now and what you need to be doing and thinking about. Whenever I told you back in 2018, when Russia and China started selling their treasury notes and buying gold, there was going to be a takeover of the currency that ruled the world, which is the dollar, and that it would start with the World Bank and that we would be looking at a gold standard. I've told some of you that the 5th of this month, that the U.S. had to make a decision about going on the gold standard or they could lose their position at the World Bank. Now, what is the currency of record? What is the reserve currency at the World Bank? Well, I'm going to give you a short history lesson and bring you up to speed. After World War II, America was the only country that had an economy that was stable. When they formed the World Bank to try to reestablish the nations around the world and create an economy that they could work with, America was the only one that had a stable economy. So when they formed the World Bank, they used the dollar as the currency of record. And some of you know this, but if you wanted to buy, say, rubles, you would go to the World Bank and you would have them buy rubles and you would give them dollars. And then if you wanted to change those for yen or any other currency, you would go through the World Bank and they would make the transactions for you based on the strength of the dollar that day. And that helped to stabilize the economy in all the nations around the world. But it's only good if the dollar is strong. Well, over a period of time, America kept being the policeman of the world, and we got into other battles and other wars and other people's problems. We went to Korea to stop the communists, and then we came home with a divided nation there. We went into other battles. We had Vietnam, and we spent so much money fighting other people's battles that in 1963, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard and gave the Federal Reserve the right to print currency as needed. Now, what is currency as needed? It's a fiat currency, which means that it has the value that the country that prints it puts on it. But it's not a standard that can be defended. Now, to settle that and to make sure that the confidence in the dollar was still strong, they pledged the gross national product of America against the dollar. Now, what does it mean when they pledge the gross national product against the value of the dollar? It means this: the powers that be in Washington said the working men and women of America make so much money and we will tax them so much so we can guarantee that as long as our gross national product is good, and that is our ability to buy and sell around the world, we bring in so much dollars, we'll bring back so much tax, and we will pledge the strength of the American working people to give value to the dollar. Well, over the years, it seems that, let me quote what Warren Buffett said one time. When all are greedy, be fearful. When all are fearful, be greedy. They have controlled the ebb and flow of the value of the dollar by frightening the American public into paying more taxes, into doing things that normally we would not do, to settling for programs we didn't like, based on the fact that they actually convinced us that we could do nothing about it. And over a period of time, that brought us to where we are today. Now, stay with me. I've taught for years, for decades, that we would have to go back to a gold type standard to give any basis of confidence to the world that the dollar was still good. But then we had problems. Now we are at a place that we are printing trillions of dollars that have no value other than the fact that we have congressmen that are saying, well, we can handle it, but they've kicked the can down the road to the point the can won't kick any further. And I'm saying that to bring this point. By printing trillions of dollars and giving away trillions of dollars and giving away $80 billion of military aid and giving away $1 billion here and $10 billion there and $8 billion to Ukraine, they have established a debt that we cannot pay. Now, when the Ukraine war started, it was a springboard into a plan that has been laid for a long time. In 2018, Russia and China started selling all their treasury notes and stocking up on gold. When they started doing that, Japan did the same, as did Korea, as did many of the other countries that said they were our allies and our friends. Our treasury notes became worthless in the marketplace. And yet, whenever we needed more money, the government would create more treasury notes. They would sell them to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve would print up paper to pay for them. And all we have now is a gigantic Ponzi scheme that is moved not in hundreds, not in thousands, not in millions or billions, but in trillions of dollars that we will never be able to repay. So when Russia went into Ukraine, and the theme was, put sanctions on them, let's hurt them financially, we lost the war at that point. For this reason, Russia stepped back with China, and they developed a cryptocurrency or a gold-backed currency that they had been planning on for years to cover their needs. And in closed circles, they were calling it the Russian, Russia and Asia dollar. And it's based on gold. You see, Russia is the filling station of the world. It sells oil and gas to Europe. It sells oil and gas to other countries. They trade oil and gas for supplies. And all of a sudden now, America says, well, we're not going to let you sell that oil and gas. And so gas goes up to $130 a barrel. And guess what? Russia just keeps on selling it. And now, instead of getting $30 a barrel, thanks to the sanctions and the pushback and the bad decisions made in Washington, now they're getting $130 a barrel, or whatever the rate would be today, somewhere north of 100 per barrel, and it's funding the war in Europe. If you don't think we're looking at World War III, you need to step back and take another look. Right now, China has what they call the yuan, which is a currency backed by the gold that they got when they sold the American Treasury notes in 2018, coupled with the gold that Russia got when they sold their Treasury notes back in 2018, coupled with what Japan has, and they are all forming a currency backed by gold, competing with the currency of the United States of America backed by imagination. Now, I was privileged to sit at a meal with one of the most renowned economists in America. His name will bring a crowd anywhere in Washington, D.C. He's personal friends with Alan Greenspan. He sits as the senior advisor on 3 or 4 different congressional committees governing the ebb and flow of currency around the world and the economy of America. He gave me his undivided attention for 2 hours, and we talked about this. And he told me, he said, everything you're telling me is right. China has been out to destroy the dollar for 10 years, thinking they could take over as the reserve currency at the World Bank, and therefore set the standard for trade around the world. But you see, it goes deeper than that. And let me take a minute to share some things with you. It's not just the fact that they can set the currency or the value of product or even the trade limitations around the world by being the reserve currency. America has used that position for almost 5 decades as the reserve currency of the World Bank to force third world countries to become a democracy, or we would destroy their economy. We used the American dollar and we weaponized the good faith and the works and the sweat of their brow American people. They weaponized our gross national product by telling us that we need to do this, we need to pay taxes, we need to go. And they used it as a threat and weaponized it against third world countries. There are countries today trying to have a form of democracy because we threaten their economy. China, if they become the reserve currency of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, will use that position to force countries, not with weapons, not with tanks, not with bombs, but by threatening their economy, to become communist. But then we have to go back a step and see what Russia has done this week. This week, Russia has made the statement that they are pegging the ruble to the gold standard, and not with the American dollar and not with the Russian national products. They are doing it with the gold standard. So the sanctions that we put on Russia when they started to invade Ukraine mean nothing to them, because they put out an edict today that they will not allow anyone to buy oil and gas from them unless it uses the ruble at the new value that they put on it, because it's pegged to the gold standard. Well, China came up and said not only that, but we are not allowing anyone to go around them because we are pegging our economy, the yuan, to the gold standard. Japan came up and said, well, if you're doing that, we've been buying gold just like you have, and we're not going to sell any of our products based on the value of a dollar anymore, but based on the gold standard. Saudi Arabia tried to develop a petrodollar that was currency that was pegged to the price of oil. Oil has gone from $30 a barrel to $100+ a barrel. And now they're saying, we will accept the ruble, we will accept the yuan, we will accept the Japanese currency, because it's all pegged to the gold standard. Now, what about the euro? Funny you should mention that. I had lunch yesterday with a currency broker, and he assured me that the dollar and the euro have been flexing against each other. But now Russia has opened a bank in Europe that will allow you to buy oil from them by converting the euro into rubles against the gold standard. I was told by someone who has very deep contacts with the European central banks 2 weeks ago that the World Bank notified Mr. Biden and the Federal Reserve that if we did not go to the gold standard, we would stand a chance of losing our position as the world reserve currency. And we did not respond. I do not know what they're thinking in Washington, D.C., but the dollar is going to depreciate. It's already depreciated some 30% in foreign markets. But here's what happens. When the dollar depreciates and it's not as valuable as it was because it's competing against currencies that are backed by gold, countries around the world begin to dump their dollars back into America in exchange for currencies that are backed by gold. And that in turn floods the market in America with dollars, which creates what is called hyperinflation. Now hear me. Hyperinflation. We could see, as we did back in the 80s, we could see interest rates that go up to 20%. That's what hyperinflation is all about. You say, well, that's just suspect. It could happen. You're saying it might happen. No, it's happening. That's why I call this emergency fireside chat tonight. It's happening. Today, Bank of America said for the American public to be prepared for one of the greatest recessions, if not depressions, we have ever seen, because they see what's happening in the gold market and in the currency market around the world. We are looking right now at the Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe, not being able to plant their crops or their fields being tilled right now. They're at war. They're missing a planting season. In San Joaquin Valley, they have a drought going on. They cannot plant what they need to plant, and that's the breadbasket of the world for North America. But here's something they're not telling you about. China just had floods for the last 3 months that washed out all of their rice fields. Our supplies are dwindling. And this is what I was told by a government official. Be prepared for food shortages and be prepared for a recession, if not a depression, because of what's going on. You say, Brother Haygood, you're making me fearful. You're frightening me. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to help you to be prepared. This is not something that's going to happen. I preached it was going to happen over 30 years ago. I told you over 15 years ago that China was attacking the dollar to become the currency of reserve in the World Bank, and people yawned through the messages, and I understand that. You know, I'm fervent about it today because as a prophet of God, I didn't hear it, I saw it. God showed it to me. I've seen what happens when this happens to a country. I've been in other countries when it happened to them. I have stood in pulpits and wept and cried. I've been on broadcasts where I told people, be ready. When you see these things, be ready. I would be remiss tonight as a watchman on the wall if I did not tell you this is not a skirmish in Europe right now. This is not a skirmish in Ukraine. This is not a battle of wits with China. They're going into Taiwan. I am telling you that I sat at the table with people that are senior advisors to our Congress this weekend, and they are talking about World War III. They're not talking about a few months of hard times. They're not talking about a situation where it might be a little stressful. They're not talking about interest rates going up a point or two. Europe looks at America right now, and they are thinking we are in an inflationary era that could go over 20% in interest rates. Right now, we could be in a point where the government will have to step back and not be able to continue spending the money that it's spending now. Now, let me tie you this into prophecy for you. 40 years ago, God gave me a vision of riots in the street. He gave me a vision of people going house to house and beating doors down, looking for food, weapons, medicine. And this is what he told me. The first time that the government checks do not clear, there's going to be war in the street. The first time that they issue a government check and they won't cash it, we're going to be in trouble. Well, I'm going to share this with you. The government said there is a new vaccine, but they don't have the money to put it out. They do not have the money for another COVID vaccine to be given away. What does that tell you? Forget the COVID. That's not the issue. The issue is the White House said we are running out of funds, and yet they just approved another $10 billion to give away to study the effect of the LGBTQ in foreign countries. They just pledged another $1 trillion to Europe for the war, and they can't pay for medicine for Americans. There are things going on that they're trying to hide from you, and I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to tell you it's time for the church to be aware that prophecy is being fulfilled around you. When God showed me riots in the street, he said, that's because the government cannot issue the checks and the stipends that they have promised the people. And now the people are afraid. Church, this weekend, I talked to a gentleman that is the head of one of the largest private risk management companies in America, bigger than AIG and independently owned. We talked about the things I've been teaching about the currency, the fiat currency, about the Chinese and the Russians waging economic war against America. We talked about the fact that cyber war and economic war is just as devastating to America as the bombs that were dropped in Pearl Harbor. It is an act of war by the Russia and Chinese right now to destroy the economy of America. And they're doing it because our politicians refused to join them on a gold standard and to have an equal value for currency around the world. Now, how bad is it? Well, I was told today by one of the heads of state in Europe and also a senior advisor to the central banks in Europe that if the ruble goes down to a 50-to-1 exchange to the American dollar, that gold will exceed $3,000 an ounce. $3,000 an ounce means that your dollar, which is a fiat currency, will be worth about 35 cents, maybe 40 cents at the most, on the open market. So whatever your 401k is, it could be down to 30% value. Whatever your savings are, whatever dollars you have in the bank, when they reset the value of the dollar to try to offset these gold standards being forced on everyone around the world, we could fall into what Bank of America said is going to happen, and that is the greatest recession, if not depression, that we've seen in 2 generations. Now, why they're not telling you this, I don't know, but I sat with the decision makers this weekend. And for hours, we talked about this. And I had them tell me, you're very knowledgeable about this. I said, the only reason I am is because God gave it to me years ago to be ready. And the Lord said, would you see these things happen? Be prepared to secure the safe place for your family and to provide for those you love. Now, the Bible said if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief was going to come, he would have suffered it not to be so. I'm telling you to be prepared. Be ready. Be in prayer. I had someone tell me the other day, well, Brother Haygood, you can't tell people this because they'll get frightened and then they'll lose faith in God. This is the time to create a prayer life. This is the time to join yourself with those that worship the same God you worship, the same way you worship. That's why he said in the last days, forsake not the assembling of yourself together. We need to bind ourselves together for the glory of God. You need to be prepared for what is coming. Now, how do you get to that place? Everyone has got to find an answer from God. You've got to ask God to help you. We are looking at a turnover. The government calls it an adjustment. The world calls it the Great Reset. You've got statisticians, you've got advisors, you've got economic senior advisors, and they're all talking the same thing. There's got to be a reset. Now, the globalists want a reset because it's a distribution of wealth, and they call it equality. You're hearing it in several of your groups that are trying to make a name for themselves. They talk about equality, equity. You talk about people that are saying, well, we're a socialist country. We will take all the money, put it in a warehouse, and everybody will have money. They'll have food. They'll have free education. They'll have free housing. They'll have free transportation. And I ask you to define for me the definition of free. Free means that somebody else paid for it and gave it to you. Well, I love a statement that was made, and I think it was Miss Thatcher that said this. She said, communism works, socialism works until you run out of somebody else's money. You cannot bank on the government taking care of you. You cannot bank on the government giving you something for free because somebody had to pay the price. I'm telling you, when God gave me the vision, I saw peacekeepers in the streets, I saw martial law, I saw riots. I saw people going from house to house trying to find food, medicine, and weapons. The Lord said, when you see the spirit of the country beginning to change, you'll know it's time to prepare. Now, in preparation, you have to be aware, not just what the news says, but you have to be aware of the spirit of the country in which you live and how it changes. We're living in a country right now where they have done everything they can to keep you out of church. In Canada, they actually arrested people for going to church and even singing hymns in their own home. In America, they haven't done that yet, but they've almost done it. They would have done it if we hadn't have had such a strong Christian coalition. They're telling you that your kids can go to school and they'll tell them that they can have gender transformation if they want, that they can choose the gender they want to be. And doctors now, when you go to the doctor's office, are not allowed to say you're male or female. They ask you which gender were you born with and which one do you identify with now. Well, we know what the scripture says about that. We know that whenever we see politicians selling us out, and that whenever we see people that are saying, not whether or not they're a Christian or a patriot, but you're trying to find out who they serve, what God do they serve, we are seeing demonic spirits manifest themselves. And I won't get into that. That's another lesson. I'm just telling you, look at the spirit of your country. When kids can't gather around a flagpole at school and have prayer, when football players cannot kneel in the middle of the field and ask God to protect them, when kids go into class and they have teachers that teach them not to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, but to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the rainbow, which gives them the ability to choose their sex, their gender, their place in life. And that anyone that stands against them are terrorists. Look at the spirit of our country that's changing. It's time for the church to stand up, be heard, and prepare yourself for what's coming. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to tell you the whole world is going on a gold standard. The American dollar is going in the tank. And our politicians are more interested in trying to get you to look the other way and worry about whether Walt Disney is going to teach something about transgender, whether or not somebody in a workshop in their back room makes a weapon that they can go target practice with, or whether or not they're going to stand around the crowd and look at a statue and say, well, he's a Confederate, that offends me. They have never allowed you to look at the real problem. And the real problem is the changing of the spirit of America and the destruction of our security by the deformation of the dollar in the world market, and allowing men and women to walk into oblivion with no hope, no ability to change. We've got to find that place in God where we are secure. I love you. I'll be posting another BCI 4 on YouTube. The BCI 4 project is the brain-computer interface that I'm teaching lessons on. Those will be in the archives on YouTube under Paul Haygood Ministries. Share this. I hope it didn't confuse you. It's a little confusing when you stop and look, but here's the bottom line. Everybody's going on the gold standard. America got left out in the cold because we have no leadership in Washington, and we are losing our position in the world as America the Great. And we are in a place where the church has been muted. It's time to change all that in prayer, in actions, and in fellowship. I love you. Go to Paul Haygood Ministries YouTube, and you can find more of our lessons, and you'll find the very teachings that I'm talking about in the archives. Until then, God bless you. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for sharing this with your friends.